As the pandemic has evolved, people have had to confront a series of losses. The loss of a sense of safety, of social connections and personal freedoms, of jobs and financial security. It is increasingly being recognized that the health costs of COVID-19 are not limited to physical health but include the effects of the pandemic on the individual's mental or psychological well-being. And I think that's where grief comes in. So again, like, you know, we spoke about how, you know, we've had to deal with numerous losses at the same time because of COVID, and I think it's safe to say that even the same is it's the same with grief, right? That we've had to sort of been forced to cope or to experience different forms of grief all at the same time. So before we unpack those, I just quickly want to read what we've termed the big 5 types of griefs. Of griefs or grief? Yeah, thank you. It didn't sound right. So yeah, the big 5 types of grief, right? And why do I only have 4? Okay, I have 4. Okay, I have 4 here, but there's one, I know which one it is that's missing. It's called cumulative grief, right? And that's basically experiencing, it's almost as if we're, how do I put it? How do I explain it? So cumulative grief is the fact that is it cumulative or collective? I can't remember now.
The collective grief is because we're all experiencing like a similar type of grief together. So that would be all of us all around the world experiencing COVID, and we all have this collective grief from being locked in or loss of a person because of COVID, and so that would be the collective grief.
And then I think cumulative, and you can go again on our socials to check it, because I might just be wrong, but cumulative grief is experiencing different forms of grief all at the same time. Again, I stand to be corrected, so if I'm wrong, please do forgive me. Here it is actually. Cumulative grief occurs when you experience multiple losses, either all at once or before processing an earlier loss. So I am right. Ambiguous grief is a reaction to the loss that has no closure, and I think that one has been that's the one that's linked to the innate things, and delayed grief, when grief symptoms and reactions aren't experienced until long after a person's death or a much later time than is typical. And then the last one is absent grief, which occurs when the bereaved shows absolutely no signs of grief and acts as though nothing has happened. This is characterized by complete shock or denial, especially in the face of a sudden loss. Which one speaks to you the most, if not all?
I was going to say, I don't know why, but I think with the big 5, because we've experienced the collective grief from COVID. I think particularly for me, it would probably be delayed, because I feel like I've experienced every single one of the types of 5 grief that we've mentioned, but delayed grief I think would be the grief that I'm currently dealing with, because in that moment when everything was happening, you kind of have to pause on your grieving process to kind of move forward. You have to, I don't know, plan funerals or whatever, make sure people are going to school, the work is done. You're trying to do a lot of chores around the house and a lot of other things that need to keep the household running and to keep yourself running and other things like that. And so you kind of had to put a pause, just pause on everything. And I think that during the 7 weeks my father was in hospital, and the 1 week when we were mourning our uncle, I kind of paused everything. Yes, I did cry a little bit, but in that moment it was kind of there are other things I think more important than my grieving process to focus on at that point in time. And so it's slowly coming back to me. However, I feel because I kind of put myself on a forced pause, this might just come bite me in the bum later on. And I think that's what happens with delayed grief, is that you don't necessarily process it in that moment, and then it comes later on, and then you're like, okay, it could be like triggered by another small loss, or just not something else that triggers it. And it's been a long, slow process.